We're all familiar with the fact that our property is taxed. And if you don't pay your taxes, it's going to cost you. But how far can a city or town, or any government agent for that matter, go to collect your taxes? In 2014, after several personal and business issues, Alan DiPietro purchased some property straddling Stow and Bolton, Massachusetts, for the purpose of raising alpacas. What ensued was several years of battle between Mr. DiPietro and the town of Bolton over his use of his own land. While what was described in Mr. DiPietro's lawsuit was pretty terrible, I want to focus on the foreclosure of the property. So we'll do that next on the Constitution Study.
Love the neighbors and have a few good friends. Every day we're everyday Americans. Oh, every day we're everyday Americans.
Hello there, everyday Americans. Paul Engel here with the Constitution Study, where we read and study the Constitution. Teach your Rights and Generation Be Free. I am so glad you could join me. You know, this is a topic that I've thought of before, and I've had a couple people ask me about. I just thought this case was the perfect one. Now, if you want to see the other articles I'm working on, well, you can always go to constitutionstudy.com. I'll talk a bit more about that after this episode, but for now, let's talk about the foreclosure on Mr. DiPietro's property. After purchasing his property, Mr. DiPietro was repeatedly frustrated in his attempts to make money from it by the town of Bolton and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The actions of the town of Bolton and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts made it impossible for Mr. DiPietro to pay the taxes he owed on his property. Eventually, the Massachusetts Superior Court found that Mr. DiPietro owed the town of Bolton approximately $60,000 in taxes, interest, fines, and legal fees. Now, the town of Bolton foreclosed on his property, which, according to Mr. DiPietro's lawsuit, was worth at least $370,000. Now, if that sounds like theft to you, Mr. DiPietro agrees, which is why he filed suit in the United States District Court for the District of Massachusetts. Under the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution, the government may not engage in a physical appropriation of property without providing just compensation. This self-executing prohibition is incorporated against the states through the 14th Amendment and further made enforceable by 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, which authorizes a private right of action against persons acting under the color of law who have deprived individuals of their federally protected rights. The Fifth Amendment claim in this isn't quite correct. The Fifth Amendment reads, "Nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation." The town of Bolton is not taking Mr. DiPietro's property for public use, but in payment of a debt. The claim that the town of Bolton is taking the excess proceeds from the foreclosure on Mr. DiPietro's property is taking it for public use doesn't quite fit either, since that was not the purpose of the taking. The claim that the Fifth Amendment's prohibition only applies to the states of the 14th Amendment is a legal fiction I've dealt with many times here at the Constitution Study. As the supreme law of the land, the states are just as bound to the Constitution as the federal government. The Supremacy Clause, Article 6, Clause 2 reads, "This Constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding." Title 42, Section 1983 of the United States Code is the federal law allowing people to sue anyone who deprives them of their rights protected by the Constitution or laws of the United States under color of law. This ensures that Mr. DiPietro has standing in federal court to sue. For having taken the surplus value of Mr. DiPietro's property, Bolton, a state actor, is liable under the Fifth Amendment's takings clause to pay just compensation to Mr. DiPietro for the surplus value of his property. As I've pointed out previously, what the town of Bolton did was not a takings under the Fifth Amendment, since it did not take the excess proceeds for the purpose of public use. In my mind, there is a clause in the Fifth Amendment that better fits what the town of Bolton is doing to Mr. DiPietro. Nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. The court said that Mr. DiPietro owed the town of Bolton $60,000, but they have deprived him of the $310,000 in equity he had in the property without due process of law. That means the town of Bolton has deprived Mr. DiPietro of his property, the $310,000 of equity he had in his land, without due process of law. Now, while the town did follow due process to collect their $60,000 debt, that does not entitle them to keep the change. In fact, there is a clause in the Constitution that makes that very point. The Eighth Amendment to the United States Constitution prohibits punitive fines or forfeitures grossly disproportionate to the offense they are designed to punish. Well, that is a fairly accurate paraphrase of the Eighth Amendment, which reads, "Excess bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishment inflicted." Is what the town of Bolton did a violation of the Eighth Amendment's prohibition against excessive fines? The tax statute already allows Bolton to collect costs and 16% interest on the debt. By taking and keeping at least $31,000 more than the taxes, interest, and fees, Bolton, under color of state law, excessively punished Mr. DiPietro. Yes, Mr. Bolton owed $60,000, but by collecting $370,000 to pay a $60,000 debt, the town has effectively fined him $310,000 for not paying his $60,000 debt. That is a fine 2.5 times larger than the debt, and quite excessive to any reasonable observer. Now, these actions are not only violations of the Constitution of the United States, but of the Massachusetts Constitution as well. Under Part 1, Article 10 of the Declaration of Rights in the Massachusetts Constitution, the government may not take private property for public use without reasonable compensation being paid or secured in a manner prescribed by law. Since I've already made my argument regarding the takings clause in regard to the Constitution of the United States, there's no reason it would be different at the state level. What I found interesting is the language of the Massachusetts Constitution's version of the Due Process Clause. "And no subject shall be arrested, imprisoned, despoiled, or deprived of his property, immunities, or privileges, put out of the protection of law, exiled, or deprived of his life, liberty, or estate, but by the judgment of his peers or the law of the land." The judgment of Mr. DiPietro's peers was that he owed $60,000, not the $370,000 of property the town of Bolton confiscated. The Massachusetts Constitution also includes an excessive fines clause. Part 1, Article 26 of the Massachusetts Constitution's Declaration of Rights protects against excessive fines and cruel or unusual punishment. Now, this is where the 14th Amendment actually comes into play, which reads, "Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the law." See, according to the suit, the tax laws of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts allows the town of Bolton to confiscate property far in excess of the judgment and keep the proceeds from any sale. This law not only claims to allow the town of Bolton to deprive Mr. DiPietro of his property without due process of law, but as a tax debtor, he's also denied the equal protection of the laws, both state and federal, against the deprivation of property and excessive fines. There is one other item in this case that caught my attention. Mr. DiPietro hereby demands a jury trial on all issues, triable by jury as a matter of right. The Seventh Amendment not only protects Mr. DiPietro's right to a jury trial, but the judgment of that jury as well. In suits at common law, where the value in controversy shall exceed $20, the right of trial by a jury shall be preserved, and no fact tried by a jury shall be otherwise re-examined in any court of the United States than according to the rules of the common law. This case is far from over. Not only does Mr. DiPietro have the trial of the district court to endure, but in my mind, it's likely this case may go to the Circuit Court of Appeals as well. After all that Mr. DiPietro has been put through according to his suit, I do not envy him, but I do applaud his willingness to stand up for what is right and just. Like so many other parts of the law, tax foreclosure laws have a legitimate purpose, but have been twisted into a judicial nightmare. If taxing authorities can foreclose and confiscate property far in excess of any debt owed without returning the excess proceeds, well, not only can they become criminal entities, but they are financially incented to do so. In his suit, Mr. DiPietro alleges that the town of Bolton repeatedly interfered with his ability to profitably use his property, sell his property, and even make arrangements to settle his debt. Could it be that the town of Bolton, with a financial interest in foreclosing on the property, was incented to prevent Mr. DiPietro from paying his debt? Mr. DiPietro also claims that the town colluded with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to prevent Mr. DiPietro from profitably using his property. Does that make the Commonwealth culpable as well? I often hear people say that we don't own our property, but merely rent it from the government. Well, if your property can be taken to pay a debt that is a fraction of the value of the property, well, then that statement may be true. What is described in this lawsuit does not sound like a free people with the right to enjoy, defend, and protect their property. From the Massachusetts Constitution, we read, all people are born free and equal and have certain natural, essential, and unalienable rights, among which may be reckoned the right of enjoying and defending their lives and liberty, that of acquiring, possessing, and protecting property, in fine, that of seeking and obtaining their safety and happiness. This sounds more like a fiefdom, where the local potentate owns the land and dispenses favors rather than justice. Isn't it sad how one of the birthplaces of liberty in this country has fallen into feudalism? Will the other 49 states learn from their debasement? As I said, this is not the first, nor do I expect to be the last example of government aid, of taxing authorities foreclosing on property and profiting from it greatly. But it's something I wanted to bring to your attention. It's something to be aware of, not just the laws in your city and your state, but of the impact this has on people as a whole. Just imagine, you run into some financial difficulties, and should you not be able to pay your tax debt in the time that the town wants, suddenly everything you've worked for, everything you've saved for, everything you've invested in your land, in your property, is confiscated to pay a debt that's a fraction of that value. That level of theft is not the establishment of justice that the Constitution of the United States talks about. It's not the justice referred to in so many of our state constitutions. And it should not be allowed to stand. Whether the federal courts agree or not, this should not be allowed to stand. I can't say I'm terribly surprised to find that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is acting more like some baron or duke or other landed gentry, believing that it owns all the land, and, well, if you don't pay your taxes, we take it all. Really is a sad state of affairs for part of the birthplace of liberty in this country. If you want to find out more, head to the website constitutionstudy.com. I've got videos, I've got podcasts, I've got articles, all the things you can use to learn about this and so much more. Maybe you want to sign up for one of my mailing lists. I have a monthly newsletter. I have a weekly kind of insider behind the scenes type list. And of course, you can always have my videos and articles emailed to you directly when they're published. Find it there, right there on the sidebar at theconstitutionstudy.com. Also, consider taking a look at the Constitution Study Planner. I know a lot of people who have talked about studying the Constitution. They're just not quite sure how to get started. It's very simple. You should find the planner on the homepage. If not, just search for planner, and you've answered a few questions about your experience and your knowledge, and the system will start generating emails to you with suggestions and recommendations to help you. I'm even thinking about adding a few new features to that, so check that out as well. And of course, if you can donate to the cause, well, that'd be wonderful. If you're listening to this on podcast, subscribe. If you're watching it on one of the video platforms, follow. But if you can donate money, that helps pay for, well, the equipment and the software that I use to keep this running. And it would be very helpful indeed. But most of all, what you can do is share this episode. In fact, share all the episodes, all the articles you can find. Share them and help other people find us and join us right here next time at the Constitution Study.